Hi, everybody, and welcome to Spirit Breakfast. And today we're still continuing with our series on the 222s. So today we're going to look at Genesis 22, verse 2. So I'm going to read, and it says, "And then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So here we have a story where Abraham is asked to sacrifice his only son Isaac. And if you remember the story, it's the story of Sarah and Abraham being promised that Isaac was going to be born. And then in that story, if you remember, there was some the promise was slow to come according to them. You know, in Habakkuk, it says that write the vision and make it plain. And then it says, even if the vision is slow in coming, wait for it because it surely come, it won't delay. What that means is that whatever God has promised you, right, it will come at the right time. It may feel like it's late on man's time, but it's never late on God's time. So yes, Abraham and Sarah might have felt like it was late in coming, but it wasn't, because it came right at the right time according to the way God wanted to do it. So that's what happens even in God when we are waiting for things, is that He's got a perfect timeline for when something is going to happen. And though sometimes we may name things as delay or this or that or the other, but we always have to remember that God has a plan. And in His plan, everything works together, right? And when that thing comes that you've been waiting for such a long time, it will be the right time. Never too late, never too early, just the right time. There's a word in Christianity that we call kairos, right? And when your kairos time comes, right, nothing will stop what God wants to do for you. And sometimes when you look at some of the miracles that we wait for, right, and then you look at how they are aligned when they finally come, you realize that, oh my goodness, no, this was the right time for this thing to happen. There are some things that you've been praying for, and the window literally opens, and there's like a really small window, and God fits you into that window. And then you suddenly realize that if I had wanted this thing, a month ago when I was saying that, oh, it's delayed, it wasn't even ready at the time. I mean, think of sometimes when you're praying for a house, but your house maybe hasn't even been built yet. And the house God wants you to have, that He knows that you're going to be so happy in, is not even built yet. So you think that you're delayed, but no, God knows exactly when that house would be ready. That's just an example, right? So that's something that just should encourage you, that it's not late. Habakkuk says that even though, he says, write the vision and make it plain. That means, you've got your desires that are aligned with God, right? And you're praying for those things, and God is like giving you the green light, like, yes, keep going, that's it, well done, right? But you're like, where is this thing? And you feel like you're delayed. But no, God's kairos is coming. The set time for that thing to happen is coming, and you just have to be patient for it. So this is just a story where I was just sharing where Abraham and Sarah, ended up using Hagar, their lady servant, to have son Ishmael. But Ishmael was still not the son of the promise. So Isaac eventually came, after they were very, very old. But he did come, right? Abraham was 100, Sarah was 90, and they still had Isaac, because God's promises are true. Whatever God says is true, right? What does it say? Is it in Numbers, where God says that God is not a man that He should lie, and not a son of man that He should ever change His mind? Has He promised, and will He not fulfill? That means that when God has promised you something, He's surely gonna come through on it, right? So that's a reassurance that we have. So here now we have this promise. So when God promises something and He brings it to pass, you always have to remember that, because it's a promise that God has brought to pass. It's His promise, His will, His work, and His way. So that means if you receive something from God, it's God's way into that thing. That thing will only prosper in God, right? So that means that Isaac at some point was going to go with Abraham to the land of Moriah for Abraham to sacrifice him at the altar, this son that he loved so much. Why? Because even to Abraham it was a reminder that, don't you forget that this is the son of the promise, this is my child. And that almost reminds you that, you know what, I started this journey with God. God gave me this blessing, and it's His way all the way. If He tells me to kill it, I will kill it. Why? Because God knows, right? He knows everything, right? So if he promised me that this was the son from whom all generations were going to come, and then he tells me to sacrifice that son, I just have to trust that surely somewhere in that story something is gonna happen. Why? Because God doesn't lie. So I just love Abraham's obedience, because Abraham does end up going to the land of Moriah. He ends up putting Isaac on the altar, and then he ends up holding, the knife about to, sacrifice Isaac. And then God is like, stop. And then he says to him, there's a ram to sacrifice, right? But I just love his obedience and his trust in God, that he knew that whatever God says is true. So if he tells me to do this, then I'm just going to follow through with his plan, because surely he knows what he's doing, right? I just love that kind of faith. It's amazing. And then the other thing I find amazing is that Isaac was about 30. He was 30, just over 30, I think, around that time. Grown man, but he was obedient enough to lay down on the altar and be sacrificed, right? Amazing, two amazing men. So they just reminded that whatever you're praying for in God, it will come. And sometimes God will demand out of that thing from you, and it'll feel like, oh my goodness, really, God, are you really asking me to do this? But just walk in obedience anyway, because God surely has a plan for it, right? So I just wanted to remind you in this message that, obedience is the key, because Abraham was told to just go to the land of Moriah, and then he was even told to go to a mountain that God was going to show him. So that also tells you that sometimes God will instruct you to go somewhere and he won't give you instructions. Why? Because he just wants you to follow in faith and trust, and know that as soon as you get to the point where you can't move anymore because you need the next instruction will come. It's just the same as when you set your sat nav, right? And then you put it on to drive, right? The sat nav will not say to you, turn left and right in one go, doesn't it? But it waits for you to get to the corner. And then as soon as you're about to get to the corner, then it says turn left. And then you drive a bit more. And then as soon as you're about to get to the next corner, then it says turn right. So it's the same thing with God sometimes. He'll give you something and he'll say, okay, go to Moriah. And then you'll be like, which mountain? There's about, I don't know how many, for example, let's just say there's 10 of them. And God will just say, go. So you keep walking. And then at some point, you just have to trust that as you are getting there, God will then say, that one. And then you go to it. So this is a lesson in trusting God. It's a lesson in obedience, because if you know that after the sacrifice, Abraham's blessing was expanded, and then his generations were going to spread as much as the sands on a seashore. So that's amazing. And then God said, I'll give you the gates of your enemies. So if you actually look at this story, it's actually the foreshadowing of the coming of Christ as well. Because if you think about it, God sacrificed his one and only son, right, on the cross. So it's a similar story. It's actually showing, it's a foreshadow of the coming of Christ, where God sacrifices Jesus, and then after that, Jesus gets the keys to hell. It says, Peter, on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So that's the same thing. So this is a foreshadowing of the coming of Christ as well. It's just an amazing story, because it teaches us, one, obedience; two, following God with full trust even when we don't have full instruction; and three, that God's promises are sure and true, and they're going to come to pass, right? Such exciting news. So I hope you're blessed today. I hope you feel more rejuvenated, right? I'll go back to Habakkuk, and let me just read it for you, so that you feel encouraged as well, because I know that waiting for promises, for God, or God to come through for you on some things that you're praying for. I know that sometimes, it's not the easiest thing, but just know that there's so much available for you. There's so much available for you in God. So Habakkuk 2 verse 2 says, then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, and it will not tarry. It will not tarry means it will come at the right time. Be encouraged and have a blessed day. Goodbye.